Hey everyone, it's been a chaotic week again in the news. All sorts of things are happening, but today I want to spend a little time highlighting what the fuck is going on with Donald Trump's cabinet. Seriously, what the bleep is happening with these people? It's like secretaries gone rogue, secretaries gone wild. We're going to have a great show. We're going to talk about it one by one. Some of the best or worst moments of some of these secretaries, because I think it's so much that I kind of feel like the cumulative insanity of it all, we are missing. So let's break it down. So listen, I have found it cringe, as the young people say, amusing, disgusting, the whole thing. I mean, it's just insane. I can't overuse the word insane when it comes to Trump's misadministration, but this cabinet in particular, it is so different from Trump's cabinet in his first term. I mean, that was bad enough, but at least there were people in that cabinet who were qualified, who had some sort of moral compass. Most of them ended up getting fired, of course, when they didn't do exactly what Trump wanted and they didn't genuflect enough. So Trump term 2, he has surrounded himself by yes men and women, highly unqualified, some of them highly immoral, doing performance art for him on a daily basis. And I think we should talk about some of them. First, let's start with our dear Secretary of Commerce, the Honorable Howard Lutnick. Okay, so Howard Lutnick is a very wealthy finance guy from New York, been a friend of Trump's for decades from the New York circles. But here's the part I want us to focus on. So last year, in 2025, late last year, he was on this podcast because it turns out Howard Lutnick and Jeffrey Epstein were next door neighbors for like a decade in New York. One of them lived on 9 East 71st Street. The other one lived next door, 11 East 71st Street. Maybe we should start doing tours of New York where we go and see these infamous mansions. Anyways, Howard Lutnick goes on this podcast late last year, and he goes on and on and on for 5 minutes talking about how he had met Epstein once and how he and his wife had been so disgusted and creeped out and just found him so icky and gross that one time that he had never again been under the same roof with Jeffrey Epstein the rest of his life. Not in financial circles, not philanthropy, not social circles. That's all it took, one time. And I thought to myself, that's pretty impressive of Howard Lutnick. Except that as the new batch of Epstein documents were released in early February, we learned that he was lying. Not only was he lying, at some point, the Lutnicks contacted Epstein to ask Epstein for the coordinates of his island, okay, so that they could dock their yacht on that pedo island. They took their children, they took their nannies, and they went to lunch there. And they ended up having had much more of a relationship than Howard Lutnick first admitted to. And this is one of these cases where the secretary doth protest too much. Because frankly, if he hadn't gone on that rant, trying to be holier than thou when it came to Epstein, he wouldn't look as stupid and as much of a bold-faced liar and as hypocritical as he does once we saw what came out from the Epstein files, this latest batch of the Epstein files. God knows what else might come out if and when we see the remaining files. Okay, so that's Howard Lutnick. Now let's move on to Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Okay, so I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but she's got this acting senior advisor who's practically her chief of staff. His name is Corey Lewandowski. I actually know him because I worked with him he was a CNN contributor for a hot 5 minutes. We coincided. I didn't like him then. I don't like him now. But it turns out that Kristi Noem apparently likes him a lot. Like, a lot. word on the street is they are having an affair. I think Lewandowski's married. I don't know about Kristi Noem, but the whole thing is pretty sordid. But here's where it gets even better. Here's where the telenovela takes a curb. Oh, and by the way, he's in some sort of special role, unpaid advisory role that he can only be at for 130 days, which he's well past. But forget government ethics. Who needs to worry about little things like that when you have important things to worry about, like the Secretary's safety blanket? So the story came out. The Lewandowski fired a U.S. Coast Guard pilot of a plane after Kristi Noem left her blankie on the plane and it got lost when they moved to a different plane. The best part about this, though, was that apparently they had to rehire the Coast Guard pilot because they had nobody to fly the plane. So that's a problem. If you're going to fire the pilot on the spot, if you're going to go on a crazy tirade and get pissed over your lost security blanket, which reminds me of that character in Peanuts. Do you all remember? There was like the one little boy who always carried his little blankie with him. Was it JB? Linus? Okay. So we've now got Secretary of Homeland Security Linus from the Peanuts comic strip. If you're going to fire your pilot, you better have another pilot unless you can fly your own plane. Okay, so not to be outdone, we've talked about Lutnick, we've talked about Noem, deportation Barbie, as I like to call her. But not to be outdone, let us now talk about RFK Jr. Oh, yes, RFK Jr. How can we forget him? Just a couple of weeks ago, he was on a podcast with Theo Vaughn talking about the good old days when he used to snort cocaine off toilet seats. Yes, you heard that. But if that wasn't enough, a few days later, he dropped a video on social media where he is shirtless, wearing jeans, doing a full workout with Kid Rock. I think they're like in a sauna or something. And RFK, the the health secretary, is there in his jeans, which I think is weird. For somebody to be working out in jeans and shirtless strikes me as weird. Even more weird is when he goes on to do a cold plunge in the same jeans and shirtless. And he's like on this sauna thing, doing a sauna routine with Kid Rock, and they're drinking It is crazy that the Secretary of Health and Human Services would be engaging in this kind of behavior, and that nobody would say to him, sir, maybe you shouldn't post this on social media because maybe you don't give people confidence on your advice when it comes to health and human services, and you look ridiculous. I mean, where is his wife? Are there no people around him telling him that this is stupid and inappropriate and cringy and all right. So now we've talked about Lutnick, Noem, RFK Jr. Oh, yes. How could I forget? The Lady Macbeth of the entire cabinet, Pam Bondi. And you know, I've known Pam Bondi for a long time. I knew her when she was Attorney General of Florida. Folks, I don't recognize this woman who I see doing the performances that she does. They look like high school auditions for Cruella de Vil. When she is in the, testifying in front of the Senate or in front of the House of Representatives. The last one, she was in front of the House of Representatives, but they had her number. She had, her burn book where she comes up with Oppo research on each and every Democrat on the committee that she can retort with and humiliate them with. But they knew what they were doing. They'd seen her do this already in front of the Senate. So the act seemed infantile, seemed old, seemed stupid. I thought the worst part of it all for me, frankly, wasn't her theatrics and her burns and insults, ad hominem insults, which I think have no place in a place like a congressional hearing, particularly from the Attorney General of the United States. These are positions that are supposed to have gravitas and be serious, and I think they require some level of decorum and respect for the office. But to me, that wasn't the worst part. The worst part about the Pam Bondi testimony was the fact that there were Epstein survivors, women who had been young girls and victimized by Jeffrey Epstein, who were sitting in that hearing, sitting a few rows behind her in that hearing. And they were asked to get up at some point, to stand up and raise their hands if any of them had offered to give testimony, to give their testimony to Department of Justice. And they all said they had all offered. Then they were all asked if the Department of Justice had contacted any of them. And they all, without exception, said no. None of them had been contacted by Pam Bondi's DOJ. But the worst part was that Pam Bondi never once turned around to so much as acknowledge their presence, to look them in the eye and apologize. Apologize for what her Department of Justice hasn't done and has done, like not redact their names, hasn't done, like not meet with them, not take them up on their offer to meet with the Department of Justice officials, but also the things that have been done by other Department of Justices. These women have been let down, have been failed, not just by the Trump Department of Justice, but, by the Biden Department of Justice and the Bush Department of Justice, W. Bush, and the Obama Department of Justice. But yeah, it was to me pretty shocking to see Pam Bondi, who I knew as a regular person, as a nice woman, someone I like to socialize with, somebody that was fun to go have drinks with. We would talk about her dog. We'd talk about, our dating lives. We would talk about our lives. She was a nice girl, okay? And to see her turn into this caricature of an evil witch, not even willing to turn around and acknowledge those victims, to look up her nose, look down her nose in disdain and contempt, was just, I think, a particular low moment for a cabinet that's had a low of lows, a high of lows, a lot of lows, let's just say. So when I tell you that it's a particular low moment by the Trump cabinet, that's a really high bar to cross. But okay, so we are leaving my former friend Marco Rubio for last. Like with Pam, I've known Marco way before any of this. In fact, I knew Marco for many years, even before knowing Pam Bondi. Marco Rubio and I grew up in South Florida Republican circles, knowing the same people, going to the same political events, volunteering and supporting the same campaigns. His first job out of law school was with my husband. He worked with my husband. My husband helped him get elected, supported him when he was Speaker of the House in Florida. So bottom line, what I'm trying to tell you is Marco and I are the same age, and we've known each other since we were teenagers. I supported him. I found him to be an inspirational, eloquent figure, young, new blood, so proud of him as a Hispanic. And then he's turned into this. And I just think that time and time again, what we are seeing with this Trump cabinet is people who, because they are so drunk with power, they are so enamored with the trappings that come with being part of a cabinet, the planes and the titles and the invitations to Mar-a-Lago and the invitations to the White House state dinners and being around in the cabinet room. It's heady stuff. Power, being in the circles of power, is heady stuff. And the things they have to do in order to stay on Trump's good side, in order to stay in those circles of power, is frankly sell their souls, become completely different people than they have been, have completely different convictions, if they have any, than they held before, if they had any before. I look at Marco in particular. I look at Pam Bondi in particular. I don't recognize these people. These people whose phone I had, who we used to talk to. We used to talk and see each other on a regular basis. They are irrecognizable for me. And I hope that people and that we teach our children and that we ourselves have a level of a red line in our internally. We all need to have internal red lines that we are not willing to cross just in order to please a boss, even if that boss is the president. The Marco Rubio and Pam Bondi, I knew. Happy to say I never knew RFK. I never knew Lutnick or Kristi Noem. But Marco and the Pam Bondi I know have compromised everything they once stood for. But anyways, Marco was in Europe. He was talking at the Munich Security Conference. He gave a speech very different than what J.D. Vance had given the year before when he was there. But, it kind of feels like Marco is very hands-on and very involved when it comes to the Western Hemisphere, Latin America in particular. That's obviously an area of interest for him, and one where I think he has been instrumental in getting Trump to bomb boats off the coast of Venezuela, to go in and extricate Maduro from the bunker in Caracas. Now they're in the midst of an all-out pressure campaign on Cuba, basically cutting off Cuba from all oil supplies. Cuba lost. Cuba had like a preferential deal. Cuba, one of the things that Maduro did was sell oil to his cronies, including the government in the dictatorship, the regime in Cuba. That's been cut off now that the U.S. and Rubio are running basically the petroleum agency in Venezuela. They've also threatened Mexico with sanctions if Mexico sells oil to Cuba. So Cuba is very quickly approaching a crisis moment. They are running out of electricity. The country can't run without oil. The cars can't run. When the cars can't run, there's no tourism. The planes can't land. So they are going through an incredibly tough time, and it will be even tougher. I guess the end game is to try to bring this government, this regime, to its knees and have them do what? I don't know. Leave. I don't know what the long-term plan is. And I don't know how this is going to play politically. I have my questions about this because there's been several waves of Cuban immigration. I'll tell you, my husband's generation, he came when he was a little kid in the 60s. That first wave of Cuban immigrants, they are all for a hardline policy towards Cuba. Cut them off, make them cry uncle, make them give up, have them all leave. But there's been a lot more Cubans and a lot of other waves of Cubans that have come more recently. And those people still have family in Cuba. The guy who drives me around in Miami, my Uber driver, who I now use whenever I got to go to events and things in Miami, he's got 3 children in Cuba. And so those kids are now not able to get around. Food prices are far more expensive because of the lack of oil and the transportation costs going up so much. They don't have electricity to run appliances in their homes. And that guy's a Trump supporter, the guy I'm telling you about. And so there's a bunch of Cubans in Florida now, an important state politically for Republicans. It's a bunch of more recently arrived Cubans and Cuban Americans, most of them who staunchly supported Donald Trump, that have ties to the island, either economic or family ties to the island, that the wave of Cubans, the hardline old generation OGs who came in the 1960s, do not have. So I don't know that this is going to be as good a political play as they think, as Trump and Marco think it may be. Not to mention that some of these Cubans who have been longtime residents of Florida are getting deported to places like Sudan and Eswatini, wherever the hell that is. So keep all of this in mind. Pay attention to what's happening. Let's remember Cuba is 90 miles off the coast of Florida. There have been times when there's been very deep crisis in Cuba, and it's ended up in flotillas and massive exodus of Cuban immigrants through the Straits of Florida, looking for freedom and looking for food. I want freedom for the Cuban people. I don't know what the best way to achieve it is. It's been over 60 years of dictatorship, but things are happening right now because of American foreign policy, and we got to keep an eye on it. We have a summit on March 7th, a Latin American leaders summit happening in Miami, and let's all keep an eye on what happens regarding our own hemisphere. So back in January, I had a chance to sit down with Maria Hinojosa. Maria is a journalist, host of the longest running Latino news show in the country, Latino USA, it's called. And one of the things I really wanted to pick her brain about, because I like to talk about with a Hispanic about Marco Rubio, a Hispanic that doesn't know him like I do and doesn't have the biases that I do when it comes to Marco. So we've got that for you right after the break. This week we have our inaugural guest, a great guest, somebody I'm very excited to have on. One of these people, Maria Hinojosa. Let me just say her name and say it over and over again. And Maria, you are one of these people who I feel like I know, but incredibly, our paths have never crossed until today. And it's a joy to be with you. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of the trailblazer that you are, the doors that you have opened. You wear so many hats. Like you just said to me, you're Mexican, you got 16 jobs. So, I mean, you are a professor, you are a journalist, you are a host. You are the host of the longest running Latino themed show called Latino USA, which is now part of iHeart. So, bienvenida, Maria.
Muchacha, muchas gracias.
So the show's called Bleep, because I'm often bleeped out for things I say. So what's your favorite word that would get you bleeped?
Is it going to be bleeped?
No.
Oh, good.
It's iHeart. That's the beauty of this.
Muy bien. So in Spanish, yo soy muy mal hablada. How do you say? I have a potty mouth.
Right.
And I have to kind of warn people because, you know, they see this journalist with all these awards and they're like, and I'm like, please, soy muy mal hablada. Right now, when the question is asked, what is my favorite? Lo que me vino a la mente es hijo de puta.
Okay, which means son of a bitch.
Which means son of a bitch.
But it feels better and sounds better in Spanish.
It does. But, you know, I'm Mexican, so, you know, no chingues, you know? Estás de la chingada, you know, is one of my favorites.
Well, every time I watch the news right now, the first word that comes out of my mouth is cabrón.
También.
That's just that's just me responding to the news. But, you know, you were just talking about being a journalist and having awards. One of the things you have is a Pulitzer. So the question I have for you is, would you be willing to donate that Pulitzer to Donald Trump if it would get him to shut up? Because, I mean, I just think his fixation is such that we should all donate any type of award we've received in our lives and send it to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Like, I have a few honorable mentions and participation awards. I've never won anything athletic, but I can give him those. I have one that I got for participating in a pickleball tournament that, you know, I'm willing to send. Would you part with your Pulitzer? What are you willing to part with?
For him?
Para callarlo, to shut him up and have him act like a real president.
The notion that giving him something is going to make him be quiet or make him change or make him better is an illusion. I would never in my life ever give Donald Trump my Pulitzer, my Peabody, my 2 Robert F. Kennedy Awards, my Edward R. Murrow Award, my 4 Emmys. Jamás. Because I feel like it is feeding a monster.
It's funny you say that it's not funny because it's really poignant. And of course, what we're making reference to is Maria Corina Machado, the Venezuelan opposition leader who did win the Nobel Peace Prize and had to take it to the White House and offer it at his altar in order to appease him and in order not to be shut out of the entire transition process, and going on in Venezuela. He's got all the leverage. But all these European leaders who for the first year, all they did was flatter him and kowtow to him and bring him gifts and trinkets and invite him to dinners with the king and things that make him feel, have learned after a year that giving in to the bully is never going to satisfy the bully.
Exactamente.
Oh.
And what's happening is that the whole world is watching this.
Yeah.
That's where I think the world is shifting before our eyes, Ana. And that is something that, we live in interesting times. Yes, we do. But to watch what is happening with our country being led by this person, I think that Canadian Prime Minister Carney, in his speech, and it hurts me to say this, but he hit the nail on the head. He said, we have to stop with the illusion that the United States is the greatest country in the world, being led by a great leader. And the more we kind of keep the sign going that, no, but we have to follow the United States, is going to be our downfall worldwide. So that, I'm trying to think about what does this mean for my kids?
Right.
How long will I be around to witness what the aftermath of this is? Pero te digo una cosa, one of my favorite, so this is the opposite of swear words. My favorite dicho from Mexico is, no hay mal que por bien no venga. This is the worst of times, but something extraordinary is going to happen when we come out of this. More people know about ICE, they know about Border Patrol, They know about the abuses that I've been reporting about for decades. They know now this country will change because of this, and it's going to change for the better.
To me, I want us to talk about Marco Rubio. And to me, this is very interesting because I know Marco. I have known Marco since we were practically teenagers. We're basically the same age. We grew up in the same political activism circles in Miami. I don't recognize the man I see, and it's particularly hurtful to see his silence after he had been so vocal on immigration issues. That's where I come from on Marco. I feel personal betrayal of our community, and I feel personal betrayal because I helped him. I supported him. I believed in him. I donated to him. He was somebody that at one point I found incredibly inspiring. So as another Latino, but who didn't grow up with Marco, how are you seeing it?
The word that stands out of everything your lead up is his silence. This is where I'm just like, ¿y qué ha pasado, Marco? And I have no proof of what I'm about to say, but he does not look well. When I see Marco Rubio, I'm like, what happened to this smile? What happened to the light in your eyes? What happened to your energy, to your determination? Whether or not I agreed with you, you were a political leader who had a backbone, literally would stand straight and talk and pontificate about issues. And now it's like he's a shadow of himself. The way he looks down, his eyes are always looking down. The way that he is embarrassed by Donald Trump just happened recently. Marco Rubio wrote a note to him and was like, hey, boss, change the subject. And then Donald Trump reads the note out loud, and Marco Rubio, again, you just see him becoming smaller and smaller. So when you say you feel personally betrayed, I understand that. From the outside, I'm saying I'm watching the withering away of a man again, is this yet another human being who is going to lose all credibility and will never be able to recuperate because of Donald Trump?
But you and I are seeing him that way, yet on the right,
correct,
they are seeing him as a leader who's building a profile, making him viable to run for president. When you hear the right wing talk about the successors to Donald Trump, the names you hear are J.D. Vance versus Marco Rubio, and basically who's going to be on top. And I think, I feel like Marco has compromised every conviction and principle I believed at one point he stood for. I think in his mind, he's probably justifying it by seeing things like the removal of Maduro from Venezuela, something that has been very important to him, something that he has worked on his entire career, something that's frankly very important to our South Florida community. People always say, nobody voted for this. Nobody voted for what Donald Trump is doing. Well, I actually know people who voted for Donald Trump because they believed he would get rid of Maduro and Ortega in Nicaragua and Díaz-Canel in Cuba. And I think Marco comes from that, right? He was, his first job in politics was working for my husband, who was the chairman of the Republican Party of Florida and had a law firm in Miami. He became city commissioner of a tiny little community called West Miami, heavily Cuban American and heavily immigrant and Latino. He then became a state legislator, became the Speaker of the House in Florida under Jeb Bush. They were incredibly close. Jeb was his mentor. He went on to betray Jeb and stab him in the back by running against him in that 2016 Republican primary. So what I've learned about Marco is that his ambition is greater than his principle. There is nothing he is not willing to compromise on or do, and no level he's not willing to stoop to in order to reach his ambition. And I think he loves this. I think he loves showing up at Mar-a-Lago for the holidays, and I think he loves having his own plane as Secretary of State and having Trump tell him what a great Secretary of State is. And I do think he has been able to, amass a lot of power under Trump. If you remember when the administration began, Rick Grinnell, that nutcase, was the special envoy to Venezuela and was determining Venezuela policy. And Witkoff was running around the world as special envoy to this and special envoy to that and special envoy to everything. All of a sudden, Marco became National Security Advisor and Secretary of State and head of USAID. And now he's Viceroy of Venezuela. So he's wearing a lot of hats. And it seems to me that he has been able to learn Trump speak and how to whisper. He's become the Trump whisperer so that Trump listens to him. Because I think the entire Venezuela operation was all Marco Rubio telling Trump, you can get rid of Maduro. He's going to get scared very quickly. So start dropping a few drones and a few bombs on these fishing boats. And Maduro's going to shit his pants. And next thing you know, he's going to take his bags and his wife. And he's going to, be in Russia or Turkey or name the country. Never expecting that it would take months and months of drones and bombs and deaths and 1/4 to 1/3 of the U.S. Navy parked off the coast of Venezuela. Billions of dollars. We still don't know what the cost of this entire thing has been. And I think Donald Trump was losing patience. But now Venezuela and that operation is something that I think has emboldened Trump and changed him. Don't you see a change in Trump after extricating Maduro?
I don't know if I can say I see a change in that sense.
Do you think he would have been threatening Greenland or Iceland? Pick the country, or Norway?
But we also know, Ana, right? And I've lived through so many U.S. interventions, right? And sadly, history has shown us that they don't end well. Right. So my question, and I don't understand, o sea, I've never had to live through something like Hugo Chavez or Maduro. I did see Hugo Chavez when he spoke here at the United Nations, and honestamente, I was very unimpressed. I mean, again, I've seen world leaders, and I was just like, can you just give me a full sentence, just a full sentence with a full thought? And he was, in fact, he reminds me of Donald Trump in that sense of just getting up there and talking, but not
populist.
really. Yeah, and just not saying anything except having this whole kind of aura around him. I think what's going to happen with Venezuela is that it's not going to, that hope que tantos venezolanos tienen, I think it's going to be very short-lived. You don't see, I mean, they took out the head of the tick, right? They took out the head, but the body is still there.
Yeah.
It's still swarming around. Yes, they have released political prisoners. This has been documented.
They haven't released all of them.
Not all
right
of
now,
them.
As we're talking, there's still hundreds of political prisoners being held.
Thousands, right? Probably. And the journalists who are still there are still under threat. So I don't see this as being the moment of liberation for Venezuela. And so it's going to be, in my view, yet another letdown. I don't, unless Delcy agrees to open and free elections like now or in 6 months, which I don't think she's going to do.
Yeah, you're referring to Maduro's vice president.
Maduro's vice president, who just slips in. How is it possible that that Marco Rubio or Donald Trump are like, yeah, sure, you're the vice president of Maduro, and sure, you can just step in. Like, even in the case of...
Because that's where I tell you, I think in theory, Marco Rubio thought and convinced Trump of this, that Maduro and his circle would all flee the country, as has happened before.
Right.
Happened with Somoza in Nicaragua.
Correct.
Happened with Batista in Cuba. Happened with Baby Doc in Haiti.
Yep.
Happened with Assad in Syria. Him and his people are living in the lap of luxury in Russia.
It's a misunderstanding, right? Of
They never thought that that Maduro would not leave, and that they would have to go and pluck him out, and only be able to pluck him out.
And by the way, it's gonna, the trial of Maduro is gonna take place here in New York. We're in Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan. He's in Brooklyn.
Yep.
His trial will be in Brooklyn federal court. And what's gonna happen? You have a lot of people now who are aware of the politics of Venezuela. I've been into enough of these trials that I don't think it's going to be a shoo-in in terms of finding him guilty or not guilty. We don't know.
That worries me.
And it could happen. And then what? And then the United States has even more shame and egg on their face when a jury of New Yorkers says, you were wrong.
We'll bring you back to talk about that trial. So every week I like to do something called Call to Courage. And it's a person or an event that has inspired me. And this week I want us to talk about Jesse Jackson, who passed away earlier this month. He battled a cruel disease similar to Parkinson's. But let's not think about Jesse Jackson in the last few years, even with the disease, even battling that horrible neurological progressive disease, he was still an activist and fighting until his dying day. Jesse Jackson, one of the things, and I didn't agree with him on a bunch of things, particularly when it came to foreign policy. He's far more progressive than I was. But as I got older and learned more about him, have met some of his children, have met people who worked for him, who he inspired. One of my great friends is Donna Brazil. One of my good friends is Mignon Moore. He opened up so many avenues. He really, people talk about breaking glass ceilings. And Jesse Jackson, who was controversial, and there were controversial aspects about his history that I don't think should be glossed over, because that's one of the things that I think makes him unique. He was not a perfect person. He was not a perfect man. Controversy followed him throughout his life. But even despite all of that controversy, he got shit done. I think we throw around the term glass ceiling breaker a little too loosely sometimes, and pioneer a little too loosely. he truly was. You know, I was talking to Donna Brazil about him, and he opened the doors for a lot of young black women who have gone to be some of the most respected political operatives, people like Donna, people like Mignon Moore, to have a place around the table, to have a place running campaigns, to have an input on policy, not just tokens, but to really be running things and be influential. And Jesse Jackson was really the first to do that. And I think it has changed our political landscape. He changed our history and he changed the political landscape. He walked so Barack Obama and Kamala Harris could run. And if we have a call to courage of the week and a courageous person of the week, we also need to have a coward of the week. And for me, this week's coward of the week, it's actually, he's not this week's coward. He's a fucking coward every week since he's been in power, is the Ayatollah of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, and if I'm not, I don't care, because as John McCain used to say about Ahmadinejad, I refuse to learn how to pronounce this son of a bitch's name. But the Ayatollah, who is older than dirt at this point, but is still holding on to power with his grubby little hands, he's in power because basically he is slaughtering his people. There have been estimates from human rights organizations and doctors that range from anywhere between 5,000 people slaughtered by this regime to over 30,000 people. And the reason we don't have a precise number and we don't know the count is because there is an information shutdown. So people went out to the streets protesting, did an uprising, trying to get rid of this regime, trying to ask for freedom and justice. I mean, we forget, because practically my entire lifetime since the 1970s, I was born in 71, my entire lifetime, Iran has been this place ruled by the Ayatollahs. But Iran used to be a world capital. It used to be a burgeoning place, a place where there was equality and there was tourism and there was fashion and there was freedom, and women drove and women wore miniskirts and had normal lives. So yeah, I think he's a coward. I think he's a piece of shit coward, because in order to stay in power, you've got to kill your people. You are no leader. You're just a coward. I want to thank Maria Hinojosa again for being the first guest, la primera, on our show. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week. I'm talking to Julie K. Brown, a personal heroine of mine. This is the woman who never gave up and helped dissect the Epstein files. Bleep with Ana Navarro is a Hyphenate Media Group production in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura Podcast Network. For more of your favorite shows, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.